In this video, I'm going to cover the step method of cost allocation for service departments using exercise 1131 as an example. So I have two service departments, maintenance and personnel, and I have two operating departments, printing and developing. Maintenance is measured by machine hours, and we can see the service and machine hours that it provides not only to the operating departments, but also its fellow service department personnel. Personnel is measured by labor hours, and again, we can see the amount of labor hours it provides not only to the operating departments, printing and developing, but also to the other service department, maintenance. It provides 500 labor hours. So our goal is to allocate our service cost. With the direct method, we didn't acknowledge work that the service departments did for each other. We just allocated the 5,000 in maintenance to printing and developing, for personnel, the 12,000 personnel, again, to printing and developing. With the step method, we're going to make a partial acknowledgement of the effort that they do for each other. Our initial starting point is that same direct cost. Maintenance is 5,000, personnel, it's going to be 12,000. But again, we're going to make a partial acknowledgement. Our starting off point, our first step, is isolating that service department that provides the most work or efforts to the other service department. And whichever department that is, whether it be maintenance and personnel, we're going to first, as our first step, allocate its cost to its fellow service department and the operating departments. And once that is done, we move on to our second department that now has a portion of the other department's service costs allocated to it and allocate it to our operating departments. So it's going to be a two-step process. Now, in this problem in the write-up, we were fortunate enough that the problem itself identified that maintenance is the department that provides the most service to its other department personnel versus personnel providing less efforts to maintenance. But don't always assume that problems will do that. So we want to make sure how I came to that conclusion. I took a look at what efforts maintenance provides to personnel relative to the other departments. It provides 1,000 machine hours relative to 1,000 plus 1,000 is 3,000. That's 5,000 in total. 1,000 divided by 5,000 is a fifth of its efforts are provided to personnel. On the other hand, personnel, its breakdown, 500 labor hours are provided to maintenance compared to 500 provided to printing and 2,000 provided to developing. 5,000 plus 5,000 plus 2,000 is 3,000. 500 divided by 3,000 is a sixth. So a sixth of its efforts are provided to maintenance. 1/5 of maintenance efforts are provided to personnel versus 1/6 of personnel efforts are provided to maintenance. I know it's hard to compare fractions, but a fifth is greater than a sixth. So maintenance provides a greater amount of effort to personnel versus vice versa. So maintenance is going to be our starting point. Then we are going to ignore the efforts that personnel provides to maintenance. Maintenance will be our starting point. So I'm going to take my maintenance cost of 5,000 and again, not only allocate it to printing and developing, but also make a partial allocation to personnel. I'm going to start with how much is allocated to personnel. There's 1,000 machine hours provided of maintenance provided to personnel relative to, again, 1,000 plus 1,000 plus 3,000 is 5,000. 1,000 divided by 5,000 times $5,000 of maintenance total. A total of $1,000 of that 5,000 in maintenance costs would be allocated to personnel. It would be the same exact thing for printing, only because the maintenance machine hours provided to printing, 1,000, are the same thing as the maintenance machine hours provided to personnel. So also 1,000 of the $5,000 allocated to printing. Now, process of elimination, you could say, well, if I have 5,000 and I've already allocated 2,000 in total, 3,000 would go to developing. I can also also work it out through my equation here. Again, 3,000 divided by 5,000 total hours. So that would be 3/5 times the $5,000 is $3,000 also that we worked out this way is allocated to developing. It is only a coincidence that the dollars agree with the number of hours just because of the relative amounts. That won't always work out that way, so that's just a coincidence. I want to point that out. So going through here again, our first step, look at the department that provided the most relative effort to its other service department, that's maintenance. We have allocated its $5,000, $1,000 to personnel, $1,000 to printing, and $3,000 to developing. We're not finished yet. Our last step is then to allocate now our full cost of personnel to printing and developing, because again, we're not going to go back and allocate a portion of its efforts to maintenance. One thing you have to keep in mind is that now we're not just talking about $12,000 of direct cost for personnel. We're talking about we have to add in the $1,000 that maintenance added into personnel. So that's why we have here $13,000 total. Again, we're forgetting about the 500 hours that personnel provides to maintenance. We're only focused on the efforts they provide to printing and developing. So if we're trying to determine what amount of personnel is allocated to printing, it's 500 hours provided to printing divided by 500 plus 2,000 or 2,500 in total. So that would be 1/5, 500 divided by 2,500 times $13,000. Again, I want to stress here, not only the $12,000 of direct costs, but also the $1,000 allocated for maintenance. So the total amount of personnel costs allocated to printing would be $2,600. Now, you can also back into this and say, well, if it's $13,000 in total and 2,600 of it is allocated to printing, then the remaining amount, or 10,400, must be allocated to developing. You could have also went through here and said 2,000 hours relative to 2,500, or 4/5 in that particular equation of the $13,000, and also came up with the $10,400 allocated to developing. And that is our step method. Again, first allocating maintenance, a portion of it goes to personnel, and then finally the total personnel cost allocated to our remaining operating departments.